During the early days of my lecturing career, I met interesting intellectuals and became friends with them, probably because of my views on things like social structures and human life in general. One of those individuals was also a professor, but of a different branch to mine. Out of respect to his desire, I shall not mention his name. He told me a method of tapping the pain away. In this simplistic approach to alternative treatment, one needed to tap gently on the site of the pain, and it would be no more. I put it to test. First, I tapped my forehead when I felt a mild headache, and it almost immediately felt good. Then I tapped my knee when I hit it accidentally on the corner of my desk. After a while, it too was fine, and the usually expected swelling did not eventuate. At first, I was very skeptical about this method as an alternative pain treatment. However, afterwards I tried it on other people, and it worked. I believe it has a psychological bearing, if anything. I remember when a child fell on the ground. Although no major damage was present, the shock of falling was devastating, and so I talked to the child that luckily not much of the ground was broken. When the child looked at the ground to discover it was fine, his painful shock disappeared. Similarly, hypnosis or diversion of any kind can also be helpful in pain management. Taking this into account, I have been able to assist my children to control shock or pain when playing sports or bumping into things by simple taps they could help themselves with. Unfortunately, Magda could not understand this treatment method without drugs, although she was knowledgeable of some drugless therapies and always nullified my help or suggestions, taking a very long time to grasp the benefits of alternatives. She interpreted my suggestion to tap as if I was attempting to hurt her, especially shortly after my being kicked out by her dearest brothers and sisters. What if I was doing black magic with those I called alternative treatments like the wizards and witches of old? She often shouted at me, using very hurtful words. "Don't touch me, you evil man. Don't touch me ever with your evil hands. Who knows what you were conjuring up? Who knows what other women you were touching with them?" I soon realized that all my endeavors and undertakings have been undermined, and I had nowhere to call home any more. I had no family due to being excommunicated from that cultist system. Although my wife and children were alienated, I knew life still continued, and I was part of it. Being an intellectual and very philosophical about life's circumstances, I could find alternative ways to live, hopefully without much hurt to myself or to anybody else, because I was utterly convinced that Magda had no love towards me, remembering what she often said, "Love can grow." Her love was growing in servitude to the Jehovah's Witnesses Association, with the belief that they were the only chosen of God, who would grant them everlasting life, and withhold it from others doing evil by belonging to different belief systems, or not believing in a supreme creator. In other words, she never felt any love towards me, as I have loved her, although she was my serious first affair, taking a very significant place in my heart. By letting her go, I provided her with the greatest good for what she believed in. The major problem was the welfare of our children, as I did not desire to let them grow without either parent, for every child needed both to evolve into more favorable directions. Then again, probably she thought of having solved that problem by stronger association with what she was completely dedicated to. No doubt she was relying on Jehovah's Witness elders to educate her children in the ways of the Bible they were supposedly very knowledgeable of, and in the strictest way possible. There was a huge clash of interests here. I preferred them to be well-educated intellectuals, with abilities and potential to excel into the heights, assisting humanity and themselves. I desired them to become healthy and happy individuals. But Jehovah's Witnesses wanted them to become faithful servants of God, just preaching the good news which they invented throughout their lives, believing they were going to have the best education after the world had ended and all humanity's endeavors completely destroyed. It is reminiscent of the story of the Tower of Babylon. Magda was convinced that the children had to be looked after by her alone, with spiritual guidance from her associates, obviously being led to think that their lives would be shattered, confused, and unfulfilled if they lived without any input from the witnesses. However, if they lived a life of slavery to that organization, like Magda and her beloved brothers understood, they would be literally dulled to strictly only consider the controversial ancient scriptures, thereby becoming unable to think for themselves. This has been the trend Magda continually displayed, always needing her associates' advice for everything. Nature seems to respect people's best interests. If such a restrictive belief system became a major part of their realities, I could only wish for them to grow up quickly and wake up to the real truth. Separations and divorce cases within Australia usually ended up in favor of women in those days. Many men have been badly hurt after divorce. Some women, on the other hand, enjoyed whatever pay for the children's upkeep and welfare they could extract. In certain cases, it might have been right, and I have not been in favor of any kind of separation. The real-life stories I was hearing were very ugly, and yet I had to prepare myself for any situation. In the case of an imminent separation, what might happen with the children? I was almost frozen with the idea. Even if I decided not to dwell on this issue for a while, without ignoring it, I was nevertheless worried. Normally ready to face anything in life, I found this matter devastating above many other tragic circumstances, for I was extremely concerned about the welfare and mental health of our children. I spent a considerable time, whenever there was a chance to do so, talking to other people, like those at the Theosophical Society, to discover ideas on how best to cope with the situation, but additionally listening to professional advice also helped me greatly. How wonderful it is that there are people who listen to others, making a few suggestions without forcing one to accept anything, unlike the witnesses. In my spare time I conducted meditation sessions there, which were attended by a number of people who were happy to come back and experience more. In reality, it helped me calm my frayed nerves. I made a number of friends and started frequenting their residences. It was good to know that I was not completely lost or abandoned in a world of uncertainties. With my other friend Ross and his friends, we practiced semi-rock music and met several people from the television industry who appeared in a variety of programs. I met a number of eccentrics, poets, bankers, solicitors, retired government officials, and scientists with a common aim. They were all asking similar questions like me. What is life about? Is this all there is to it? How can we help the world become a better place? Is there indeed a life beyond? Frankly, none of these issues could one ever mention to Magda. For her, there was nothing other than what her witness brothers knew and obsessively adhered to. I was outgoing, and she was what she became, hater of the world for what it was, never wanting to be a part of it. Besides, the places I was frequenting could only be those where witches and evil scientists called upon the frightening spirits, as she declared many times, without knowing anything about them. Whenever she had a brief glimpse of those friends, she spoke of them quite abusively. Old wisdom declares, "Show me your friends, and I will tell you who you are." She did not like them. For her it was like, "Show me yourself, and I will know who your friends are." There was a time when I wanted to discover a little more about the Victorian Spiritualists' Union, without the need to tell anything to Magda, as briefly mentioned earlier. One Sunday afternoon she went with all three of the children to see her brothers, probably reading Bible texts, and I decided to go to the city and attend the Spiritualist Union gathering at 71 to 73 Beckett Street, just to see what was happening there. I felt extremely free. The people were friendly and welcoming. They sang a few old well-known hymns, had a short lecture about life's continuity, and a psychic lady, Millie Heinemann, gave overhead readings. She sounded very accurate, and I was happy to have gone there to discover a completely harmless and helpful activity. Millie made mention of certain issues when speaking to me regarding my unfortunate nightmares. George Eldred was the president of VSU in those days, and the impression I had when visiting them for the very first time still lingers. What that psychic told me in her reading about my marriage cannot easily be forgotten. That I thought was highly surprising, because I had never told anything at that stage to anyone, but somebody else, knowing me, might have done the deed. However, before anything like that happened with my family, I could seek different options, although I had very little hope. Magda, apart from being extremely biased, was completely dependent on what Jehovah's Witnesses suggested, therefore rendering herself incapable of doing anything important without any advice from them. When speaking with her later, in a very limited fashion, due to me being declared an evildoer, I suggested a mini-holiday could help her. Days later she came up with a similar idea, just the way her faithful friends suggested. Obviously it took a while before she could speak with them. Who knows what other negative suggestions were made? As usual, my suggestion had been completely ignored. One hoped that what we were experiencing at the time was a bad dream from which we needed to wake up quickly. Alas, it was not a dream. I hoped that long before drifting apart completely, we could restore some sense of unity as a family, and so I suggested that, perhaps by relaxing herself on her own, away from her responsibilities, it could give her a chance to refresh her mindset. She responded that her brothers were suggesting she should have a break. However, I believe they have recommended her to be very cautious towards me, and have assisted her to spy on me with the aim of destroying our marriage. This is not a negative statement, but an accurate observation and analysis. Sadly, if she was to spend time with a few extremely fanatical people with their dogmatic considerations, it would add still more to her confusion about where to go and what to do with her life, affecting the children adversely. However, if it was at all possible, with a clear mind she could hopefully make the right choices. On the other hand, I was prepared for unexpected surprises. She had the backing of a whole organization, whereas I had no one to turn to other than the justice system of the country. According to many people I have spoken to, as a male and citizen of Australia, I would end up losing everything I had worked hard for. That did not sound promising. On the other hand, Magda wanted to keep her German citizenship at all costs. Apparently she did not need to vote, respect the country's constitution, or flag, for Jehovah's Witnesses never recognize any of those rights and expectations of the countries they are citizens of, and she was content with that. Remember me telling you the short account when I was granted my Australian citizenship at Moonee Ponds in a ceremony where we were issued citizenship certificates followed by normalizing my name? She reluctantly attended the occasion as she was terrified in case we would have to sing the national anthem. I suggested that she could remain seated, perhaps uttering a silent prayer instead, knowing she would do that anyway. She spent that time outside with the excuse of needing to go to the restrooms. What I discovered is that many witnesses live on government handouts while doing God's service in a world which is ending, and some of them prefer to live on borrowed money. There was an unusual and unethical feeling in the air as a number of witnesses spoke about borrowing large sums of money before the end of the world in the belief they would not need to pay it back, which resulted in numerous lawsuits and bankruptcies after 1975, the year when the end was proclaimed to take place. Applying the Bible rule of paying what belongs to Caesar and what belongs to God, they paid their taxes, but doing a well-paid job would cause bigger taxes, and that had to be avoided. Besides, why should anyone even bother to worry about an exciting career? For after the world we know has ended, the witnesses are supposedly going to have everything their hearts desire. I was not sure whether Magda considered citizenship of Australia later, probably expecting that she may not need to bother, for Armageddon was just around the corner. However, for now, we had our hands full with current concerns. All those cult-based expectations from their so-called governing body was to keep them focused only on kingdom interests, so that their members of the slave class would give their undivided attention to the supposed task ahead. Interestingly, I had a strong feeling that one of her faithful sisters suggested that she should be careful when her husband agreed for her to have a holiday, as he may have an ulterior motive. Just imagine if he decides to disappear with the children due to his overseas connections. You might ask me why I felt that way. It is because I had been psychoanalyzing her from every conceivable angle in an effort to try to understand and help her. She was inflicted with dangerous phobias, and as you will later discover, she did exactly what she expected of me, abducting the children and disappearing. However, she did not consider her actions as being illegal, for her advisers were certainly not cognizant about the law. As observed, she was completely dependent on her witness brothers and sisters' advice for every move she made. When she decided to seemingly holiday in Hobart, probably staying with the Strohbachs, it had to be for a reason. It could have been just to get a little closer to her brother Siegfried, who had a certain affection towards her, but she could not see it. Any closeness of this kind would be taken as, "But he is my brother." Nevertheless, I was to become mother and father to my darling children for the duration of her holidaying. I was full of hope, thinking that we could perhaps reverse the condition at hand, if everything was more favorable a little later. My main desire was to enable ourselves to change what had become a routine with our children, because for a considerable time they were never allowed to greet me, never properly talk to me, never want to go out with me to the city or to parks, and indeed never laugh with me any longer. They were well indoctrinated. Their lives were based upon Magda's individualized principles of going to school and never making any friends unless those friends were from Jehovah's Witness families, coming home and telling everything they had done at school. They were not encouraged to learn anything worldly, and their going to school was only due to the law they had to respect. As far as witnesses were concerned, the only education the children needed was through Bible study and attendance at the Kingdom Hall to learn all about Jehovah. If their mother discovered that they had played with children belonging to the worldly families and that they skipped praying to God for their food, they were in desperate need to be disciplined according to witness teachings. In other words, they needed to be punished harshly on a daily basis. This meant being totally abused, either verbally or physically, by being beaten with wooden spoons by their mother. In reality, they were expecting the same from me, but soon discovered it was never the case. However, whenever I endeavored to talk to the authorities about this in detail, I can assuredly say that I was neither taken seriously nor any investigation was forthcoming. I felt I was indirectly being laughed at. Remember, men were never taken seriously, for every male was categorized in the same light. Although all men could not be the same, alas, much of the social wrongs were allegedly committed by them, whereas women were not always angels either. I felt I had no choice but remain a silent sufferer for a very long time. What the children were telling me was unthinkable. When Magda was uncontrollably angry with them, and this was a daily experience at home, especially when I was at work, she was ordering them to take their underwear off, so that she could break those spoons on their buttocks for wrongs they might have done several days before. For instance, they may just have spoken to their dad, the wicked man. I remember one of our daughters crying and asking her mother's forgiveness for accidentally talking to her daddy. She would usually shout, reminding them, "I told you I was going to keep my promise."